I'm so excited to have you here with me today as I restart my Artist Talks with Anna series.
Super exciting.
It's super exciting, and I'm so happy to have you as my first guest as we enter this relaunch.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Aw. And I don't know, have you had an opportunity to see any of the conversations I had? It was a series we did
Mhm.
during the pandemic through Instagram Live that was constantly riddled with technical failures on my part. But they were awesome, awesome conversations. So yeah, I'm getting nods. So that's a yes.
hmm Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I did see them.
Good. So we are trying out. I've already warned Aaliyah that she's my guinea pig for trying out a slightly new format. Obviously, we're
Yeah.
not doing this via Instagram Live. We're doing it through Zoom and recording our
Mhm.
conversation so that we can better share it out with all of you and people can access it more readily. So, in any case, you know the drill. And the way I like to start these conversations is really giving you an opportunity, Aaliyah, to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then I always like to take a stab at sort of my take on things and allow the artist to sort of disprove me or whatever. Take the conversation from there.
Okay, cool. Okay, I guess I'll start. My name is Aliyah Bonnette. I am, I guess, like a mixed media artist who uses both fabric and painting to create kind of like what I call in my head, I just call them painted quilts. Where I am painting figuratively on quilts and also using other things like beading or other pieces of fabric, rope, embroidery, applique to further enhance my compositions. Um, yeah.
All right, and there we go. Back to my old shenanigans. Oh, jeez. Well, I'm sorry that the dogs cut you off, but I think that's a wonderful intro. And just
Mhm.
so everyone knows, before we get started, and I'll give you an opportunity to let folks know how they can engage with you and see your work. But Aaliyah is currently one of our two regional artists in residence at Artspace and
Mhm.
has a studio on the second floor, Studio 215. And I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a number of years now. You first
Mhm.
got involved with us as one of our summer arts interns and have been an amazing teaching artist for us in many different capacities over the years. So
Yeah.
it's been really rewarding for me to get to see that relationship evolve and change.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I love the description that you give of your work because I think it does encapsulate it so well. Painted quilts.
Mhm.
And it's an unusual media and one that I think took you a while to get to. And so
Mhm.
I'm gonna throw out some of those ideas I said, but I'd like to come back to sort of that idea of like the evolution of your process because I think for me, the way I think of you as an artist is you're someone who's very interested in exploring ideas of identity and
Mhm.
particular aspects of your own identity through your artwork. And when I
Mhm.
first was introduced to you and your work, that really was in the realm of painting, figurative painting.
Mhm.
And but I think there's something about this merging of these two different media that you have really struck this process that enables you to get at those sort of ideas around identity in a really poetic nuanced way where the process is very much tied to the content of the work.
Yeah.
Does that
Mhm.
seem, yeah?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think because of the medium I'm using quilting, which is I think, a very personal process in general. And so much of quilting is part of your identity as a quilter in terms of the fabrics that you're choosing, how you're laying your composition out. Are you a pattern based quilter? Are you somebody who's more of an improv quilter? That all I think informs the viewer. So it, and as somebody who's, I think, very process based, like I'm very into the process of what I'm doing, it helps me kind of get that out of my system a little bit, because I'm the type of person that is like, if I had the time to make my own paint, I would. So that allows me to be very controlled over, like, I guess what the quilt, but also in my head, I'm working as a standalone quilt, but also at a certain point, it kind of becomes my canvas. So it allows me to really have control over the background of my images, which is important to me.
And do you think in that, so like, just to clarify for people listening, so the process for you sort of starts with creating this quilt, and
Mm.
that's helpful to think of it as that then becomes your canvas, where figures are, it's often a singular figure, but are then painted on that backdrop. But do you find, like, hearing you talk about that process, like when you start the process of the quilt, is there already a plan in place, or is that process sort of allowing that plan to take form? Does it, like, sort of that because, like you said, the quilting process is one that's very personal for you. It has a deep familial roots,
Mhm.
and then of course all the other histories within that medium that you alluded to. Um, but it sounds I'm struggling to articulate myself. Like, it's at once this process that allows you to sort of control this thing, but is it also a sort of letting go? Like, where can you just elaborate a
Um,
little bit on that?
yeah, so I think at times my process is very improvisational.
Hmm.
And it's pretty much it's on the spot a lot of the times. But to a certain extent, my pieces are very thought out and intentional. Pretty much most of the time, because of my process. Once I really start laying the figure out, whether it's chalk or with pen or whatever I'm using to lay that figure out, I really don't have room for error. So in that sense, like whatever's going on the quilt has to be very planned out. I don't have room for error because I'm using paint on fabric, and you can't just paint over that area
Right.
and repaint it. So for me, kind of that aspect of letting go is my way of quilting, because I'm not using patterns, because it's very improv based, because for the most part, I'm allowing room for error on my pieces, which is uh, to an extent intentional. A lot of it's because I'm a self-taught quilter, but some of it is also just because of um, quilting in general is not necessarily like a super perfect thing. Sometimes the edges don't have to be a complete square. Sometimes you can see the rips in the fabric because of how old that quilt is, or the wrinkles because it's been washed so many times. That I kind of leave up to, because then it just kind of naturally allows the quilt to do whatever it wants to do. I will generally have like a color scheme of what I want the quilt to look like. I'll create kind of a mock-up of the quilt. But after that, like whatever size I'm cutting the fabric, what colors I'm choosing to place where, none of that is necessarily planned out until I'm actually in the process of creating the quilt top, if that kind of helps clear that up.
Yeah. And so then with that process, do you find yourself, even though you have a sort of plan and an idea in mind, that process of the actual making and the sewing before the sketch and the paint comes into play,
Mm-hmm.
is that process an opportunity for you to start honing in on the idea, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense? So that's where the intuitive aspect comes in, is what I'm
Yeah,
hearing.
so I definitely am. It's about I know what the quilt is going to look like about 30% of it. Like in my head, I'm
Oh,
like, I'm
wow.
going to use these colors. This is the colors I'm going to use. But as I'm going through the process of quilting, then it's kind of like, okay, well, I want this square here, this square here. this is the color that I'm going to use for the binding of my quilt. This is how these are the quilt lines I'm going to use. This is the pattern I'm going to use for the actual binding of the quilt. All of that kind of comes together as I'm actually making the quilt. So the rest of it is kind of like neither here nor there, which gives my mind, I think, because I'm somebody who's very like, I need to, because what my pieces are about can often be a little heavy and extremely conceptual. I plan that very detailed. The quilt kind of gives me a chance to play
Yeah.
a little bit more than I normally would.
Yeah. Well, let's
Mhm,
get into that then. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the content and the fact that they can be heavy.
mhm. Yeah, I think I started painting when I moved to North Carolina. And I moved to North Carolina when I was 16. So that moving from like a very urban place, because I was in Maryland, to a place where like there were cows and, like chickens, and you had to drive to get places, but that also just kind of came with a cultural differences as well. Like people are a lot more comfortable, um, like telling you how they feel, meaning like this was the first time I saw a Confederate flag in real life was when I moved here. I think I went from a school that was primarily Black to a school that was primarily white. So I was like pretty thrust into the culture um, of like not not being super inviting, and being racist very blatantly, more so than I was used to at all. I think that made me feel like I needed to voice my opinions a little bit more than I normally would have. Definitely made me a lot more interested in the fact that I was Black, because I was around Black people all the time. Like that was just normal for me, but I was removed from that a little bit more. And it made me a lot more aware. Granted, I'm light skinned, and so it's a lot less than what I'm sure somebody who was darker skinned is going through, but I was still going through it a little bit, and that made me need to talk about it in a way where I could express myself, and that it just happened to be art because I joined art club. Um, so I think I was always intentional about what I was creating and why I was creating. Like I needed a why, and I knew that it's hard for me to like just sit down and paint a landscape, because in my head it's like why am I making this? Um so the concept and concept has always been something that was in my work. Um it wasn't always necessarily super about my identity and like it being more personal. I think until I found out that my grandma was a quilter. Um, and then that's when I started taking a little bit more of a personal approach to my artwork. I dabbled in it, I think maybe a little bit, in terms of like talking about hair culture and that sort of thing. But then I started talking more about my identity as a Black woman when I went to college.
Right. And I think, in some of those, when you went to college, you were still primarily painting, and
Hmm.
you said you discovered your grandmother's history as a quilt maker, and
Hmm.
things clicked. So I'd love to hear a little bit because, and I may get this very wrong, so please correct me, but I think the last time I visited your studio, we were sort of talking about that, just sort of like these concepts that you're dealing with in the painting about blackness, in particular,
Hmm.
Black female identity, sexuality, different aspects of that in your painting being heavy, and it's not easy. It
Yes.
opens up
No.
challenging conversations, and
Yes.
but then the quilt adds this sort of layer of, there's the personal aspect, which I'd love to hear more about, but there's also this sort of comfort, there's this sort of approachability through
Mhm.
that quilty medium when paired with these uncomfortable subjects, it
Mhm.
sort of provides this interesting access point, and it's not about sugarcoating things or
Mhm.
yeah. Like, can you talk a little bit more about that aspect of it, because I find that in particular very interesting, is this sort of comfort, home nostalgia paired with things that, yeah, are
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Um, well, I started quilting primarily because I was interested in the fact that African American and like well I was in African American studies, and we started learning about quilts that may or may not have been used to aid slaves to freedom in the Underground Railroad. That pretty much like made me think, maybe I should make a quilt. I don't know. And so I was talking to my mom about it, and she was like, I think my mom used to quilt. You should ask your grandfather about that. My grandma passed away before I was born. So a lot of the information that I find out about her is kind of in converse, like passing. So that was like the first time I'd ever heard of my grandma really sewing or anything like that. And so I called my grandfather, and he said, yeah, she used to sew, but I also I have all her fabric and quilts she never finished and sitting in my basement. You want it? And I said, of course, I want that. um, a lot. I wasn't necessarily thinking I would go in the direction that I am now, but my family isn't super sentimental in terms of keeping items, and that's made me pretty sentimental about keeping everything. So if I wasn't going to do anything with it, at the very least I would use it as kind of like a, this is the history of your family and your ancestors, and this is something that your grandma physically touched. And because I was super close with my grandma on my dad's side, I was lacking that on my mom's side. um, and so that was a way for me to get closer to my grandma. So I started learning how to quilt as a painter in my head, at least. It was like, how can I quilt? How can I paint on these things right here? So that kind of started that journey. I think it didn't really dawn on me until maybe a couple quilts in that there was kind of like this juxtaposition between like the comfortability of a quilt and the feeling of home that you're getting on a quilt, and then me like directly like throwing that out the window as I'm talking about like um like Black women not being comfortable with their sexuality because they're placed in an environment where they're told not to, or they're told to be over sexual. That's placed on them, and as a result they regress in their sexuality as a Black woman in America. So as I'm talking about these sort of things, there's like this quilt that's like bringing people in, because first of all they're like, what is this, a blanket, and why is there what is this, a painting on it? And they're going up to it, and then they're kind of hit with the fact that it's a Black woman in the nude on this quilt, that is struggling with her sexuality at the same time that she's nude looking directly at the viewer. So that became aware to me, and then at that point it was like, okay, well, how am I going to play off this? I think when you think of quilts you think of home. Naturally when I think of home I think of my family and I think of ancestry, and then I just start kind of snowballing into the pieces that I'm making. So
Hmm. That it's all very interesting, to me, and something that just hadn't really occurred to me before you were just speaking, is that idea of the history of quilts within African American culture in
mhm,
particular, because there is that sort of universal home
mhm,
quilt, comfortable, but that idea of the quilt being an object of power and
mhm,
agency, and that sort of particular history that exists. Or you think of Gee's Bend, and this
mhm,
being a one of the few art forms where African American women in particular are recognized in institutions like, the
mhm,
Metropolitan Museum and MoMA and all of that,
mhm,
that then it takes on another another layer that
Right.
as I just it just clicked for me. So that's
Yeah.
fascinating.
And G's Ben was also a huge inspiration for me as I started learning more about Black art and Black crafts people in general, because I wasn't learning that in school. And I was like, I'm in art school, I'm in all these art history classes, but I could count on one hand the amount of Black artists that they have brought forward for us to learn about. Um, and that pissed me off.
Sure.
So in my head, well, if they weren't going to teach me that information that's super important to me as a Black woman, but also to me as an artist, I'm going to learn myself, which kind of started my journey on Instagram and like finding contemporary Black artists who were making then, which is how I found out about G's Ben, because I was quilting at the same time, just kind of looking up about quilters and stuff like that. And the fact that there is like this massive, or not massive community, because the community is kind of small, but the massive impact that this community kind of
Right.
had on the art world, which is interesting because, you know, there's things there, but
Hmm.
um, you know, just to think about the fact that none of this stuff is being taught. And then you start thinking about the Harlem Renaissance and just back then, like you think about the the enslaved women who were making these quilts for their masters, and like none of these quilts were preserved. Where are these quilts that they were making? And I was reading about like the Freedmen Bureau's project where they were interviewing um um formerly enslaved people, and they were talking about quilts. Quilts pops up so many times, creating conversations around quilts, creating meetings to facilitate, um, you know, protests and riots and whatever else they were facilitating, creating a home. And so maybe quilts weren't necessarily used as a concrete way to help slaves to freedom. Like they may not have been like reading the quilts to get their way to the north, but they were using quilts as a way to facilitate conversation. Um, which is what I hope to do through my quilts, is like as people are looking at my quilts, they're used as a way to facilitate conversation and community and kinship. Because a lot of the times when I'm talking to people about quilting and they're like, oh, my grandma used to quilt, or this person in my family used to quilt, or, you know, whatever race they are, like it in their mind, it makes them think of family and kinship and ancestry, which is a lot of what my work is evolving towards, and is less about my personal experience and my identity, but just the fact of like how your ancestors can have a effect on you currently, how they can aid you and help you in past lives. They may not be alive now, but they are directly influencing you or making you think about things, which is what my work is, I think, going towards now more.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really powerful concept
Mm-hmm.
to create that conversation and connection, undoubtedly. And then you think about, well, I don't want to go, well, I'm going to do it because I started. That idea of sort of the within African American communities having to sort of create kinship when so many enslaved people were denied
Mm-hmm.
their own kinship and history, and that the importance of it becomes so strong, and yet at the same time it does become a concept I think we like all humans can connect to. But then the
Yeah,
tragedy of that, the violence of that history, just yeah, I mean it's gut wrenching to think about
yeah.
that, but it's so
Mm-hmm.
important, such a powerful concept.
Yeah. And I think that like when I think about my audience and people who are viewing my work, my work is primarily for Black people. Um, and primarily just because of the lack of representation. I enjoy when everybody likes my work, but when Black people come into my studio and they immediately identify with things that are within my quilts, and like concepts that I maybe talking about that I don't like outwardly say, but they get, is super powerful for me. Because when you're thinking about kinship, like it may not like you're saying, it's not necessarily people who are related to you. I think as Black people, we have this like super interesting and unique experience to where being Black is both our culture. Um, uh, I'm talking Black Americans. Being Black Americans is both our culture and our race and our experience, because we do have like this entire Black diaspora, um, of Black people in Central America and Afro Latinas and all these people, in the diaspora, Africans, but they may not have that experience. They don't have that direct Black culture that we have here in America. Is like the kinship that brings, the like the essence of family that brings when people are looking directly at my work that I enjoy, or that I want to help facilitate. Mm-hmm.
Have you found through those connections of engaging with Black viewers of your work and that sharing that happens, that the sort of oral histories that
Mm-hmm.
then get shared, that are sort of the basis, I think, in many ways of a strong sense of kinship, have those sorts of conversations and interactions started to inform the sort of conceptual areas that you're exploring?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know a lot of it, starts from you, but it sounds like that's so important to you. Like, do you
Mm-hmm.
ever collect oral hit? Like, how does that aspect fit in?
Okay, yeah. So, in to a certain extent, I do. I think it's more of like me collecting. Like like I collect old Life magazines from during the Civil Rights Movement, as a way to kind of archive that. But then also, I'm constantly buying books of contemporary Black artists and like reading about their experiences and kind of their stories, because a lot of times there are connections between our work. Like, where a lot of times as Black artists, we're talking about identity. We're talking about different stories that have been told throughout history about Black people, about Africans, about Afro Latinas, whatever. Like, we're all just kind of connected, no matter where you're in the diaspora. So I think like just having those conversations with those artists, and but then also, just like, it has made me stop painting myself as well. Because my last series of work, I was I was the um, I was the inspiration behind the figure. I haven't really painted myself since I moved into Artspace, which is intentional, because as I'm learning more, as I want to be more representative with my work, because with painting myself, yeah, I'm still representing a Black woman, but that's super limited in my that it limits greatly what I can do. And as a 23-year-old who wants to keep making work till she's like however old, like I want to not limit myself and put myself in this box of only painting myself, because then you get comfortable, and that's not something I'm interested in doing. Um, and so it definitely has made me listen to other people's stories more with intentionality, um, in terms of like, how are their stories similar to mine, but then also like, how can I amplify their stories while also, talking about my identity as well within my work. So it's just made me stop painting myself. It's made me less about me, I guess.
uh, um, so what are you working on right now, Aliyah? Like, is there something that you're excited about that's happening in the studio at the moment? Are you facing a particular challenge or problem? Like, where are you in the studio?
Oh gosh. I'm at the point right now where it does take me quite a long time to finish a piece. Like, it can take me 3 months to finish a piece of of the normal size I'm working with, which is about 5 by 6 feet, I guess.
Sorry, I just want. So, do you typically like just work on one piece at a time, or do you have multiples going?
It depends. I tend to do have multiples going because like I have the attention span of a squirrel. But
I feel
I'll
you. I'm
yeah, I'll have like one piece that I'm mainly working on. When I get like frustrated or tired with that piece, then I tend to move on to another piece that I'm working on. But for the most part, it's one piece at a time because I work kind of slowly. Or it's not that I work slowly, but my process makes me work slower than what I want to.
sure.
Um, so I'm always working on things. I tend to think in series, and right now I have like the past couple months I haven't been working in series. I've really just kind of been like throwing whatever on a not well, throwing like putting whatever on the quilt, and the next one is not necessarily related to that. Um, that's kind of what I've been doing now, but I think about to start working more specifically on a couple series based on different shows I have coming up.
Well, I definitely want to come back to that so people know where they can see you and what's coming up. But I think it's just an interesting thing that I hear often from artists because you are someone who's just recently finished a BFA
Mm-hmm.
program, and I think it it can be so helpful to have that sort of series or like thinking about the
Mm-hmm.
body of work that you can have. But I think there are times too in for artists where that is just very restrictive, and so allowing
Mm-hmm.
yourself that space to play or experiment or just sort of not be so concerned with that
Yeah.
body of work becomes really
Mm-hmm.
important. And I think it's very challenging, especially for someone who's just finished a BFA or an MFA program,
Yeah.
to allow themselves to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to hear that that's where you are.
Yeah. That is interesting too. I think that I have a good amount of friends who are self-taught artists. And I think that is the different, like one of the differences that I notice kind of about people like artists who went to school and artists who didn't go to school is they're definitely a lot more experimental because they're not always necessarily thinking in terms of series. Like
Right.
I think that we were kind of trained, at least at my school, we're kind of trained to think in series because we were super focused on our senior thesis in our show. So it forces you to think in series, but people who aren't, they don't necessarily have to be, they're not forced to think about a series. They're not forced to think in terms of a goal of like your show. They're creating because they want to create and they want to get better at their craft. And I think that is a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're both what's sort of not tragic's way too strong a
Mhm.
word, but what's sort of sad about that, from my perspective as like an arts administrator and curator, is both of those modes are so important because I think,
Mhm.
working towards a series requires a level of discipline. It
Mhm.
requires a level of commitment to a series, like, and accepting that maybe not every piece is going to be
Yes.
amazing. Like, you might make, I mean, not turds, but there's
Not every piece is going to be your favorite piece in that series.
that's right. But like to have developed a series is
Mhm.
important if your
Mhm.
goal is to like show and have exhibitions and things like that. But yeah, the flip side is exactly what you're saying. Like being able to really hone your craft and dive deep where you want to be without that
Yeah.
pressure
Mhm.
is also extremely valuable. So I think
Mhm.
yeah, it's just an interesting conversation that comes up often with artists, and it's a
Yeah.
challenge to find that balance. So
Mhm. For sure.
yeah. Anyway, well, let's get back because I know we're probably running out of time before Zoom kicks us off. So I definitely want to talk a little bit about just how people can engage with you. Um, if you keep studio hours, for example, but definitely want to hear more about these upcoming shows that you've.
Yeah. I'll be at the Green Hill Center in Greensboro, North Carolina for their Presence exhibition, which I'm super excited about. You can also find me um, on my website, which is www.aliyahbonnette.com, or Instagram, which is at Sweet Peach Lee, which is where I'm probably the most active. um, and then I'm also at my studio, and I'm like I just kind of graduated, so I'm like taking a break from me being forced to be in my studio all the time. So I tend to be kind of like in and out. But if you ever want to come visit, you can shoot me an email, which you can find on my website or my Instagram, or you can DM me on Instagram, and I'll make sure I'm there when you're coming. Um, and then I'll have the show with Artspace. Um, I think in like sometime 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll have a new body of work for that, and then a couple shows up in the air that I may or may not be doing. But you'll, if you follow me on Instagram, like you'll be kept updated on what I'm doing.
Excellent. So when do, and I'm sorry if you already said this, and congratulations on the Green Hill show. I think they do
Thanks.
excellent exhibitions, and
Yeah,
it's
I'm excited.
so worth the trip out to Greensboro for
Hmm.
folks listening. So when is that show?
Oh my gosh, please don't start me lying. I'm pretty sure it is at the end of July, and it's up until, oh, it's up for a long time. October?
Okay,
Yeah.
that's awesome. So like in the next couple weeks.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's some super fun artists in there. So I'm really excited to be showing with some of the people I'll be showing with.
Name one.
Clarence Hayward, he's one of my faves right now. Stephen Cozart, amazing artist who
Amazing.
is an ECU alum. We're in the same program.
You alum?
Yep. We're in the same art program.
At the same, not at the same time.
Not at the same time,
Not.
but he was in the same
Oh,
program that I went through. He was in painting. I was in painting.
yeah.
Um, one of his professors in his was went through school with him, so that's super cool.
Oh, that is.
Um, yeah, Alia
Oh, Bermini?
Armenia,
Oh,
she's in
awesome.
that show too, so that's exciting. Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited for that show. I have
Hmm.
not been out there in quite some time.
I've never been there, so I can't wait to go see
Oh,
it. Yeah.
oh, I'm excited for you. It's a beautiful
Mhm.
space, and
Mhm.
Edie Carpenter still runs it, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, and I'll have two pieces in that show.
wonderful.
Pretty some big ones, so that's exciting. Yeah.
Well, what other, since it hasn't kicked us off yet, and we're on the subject, what other artists are you watching right now? Like, in
Oh gosh, I could list, like the list goes on and on. Kara Walker, she was a super big influence for me, especially in school because she really like made it clear that I could talk about the things that I wanted to talk about while still being in a white space. So that was super important for me. Carrie James Marshall,
yes,
he's like phenomenal. Bisa Butler, Bisa Butler, oh gosh. Oh, Bisa Butler, she is like
see,
quilter number one right now.
okay,
Her work is phenomenal. Basil Kincaid, he is like a collager, mixed media artist, also a quilter. He's phenomenal. His work is amazing. Um, who? Oh, Ambrose Murray. She's a phenomenal textile artist right now. Um, I've been following her work for a super long time. There's so many other people, but that's like a good few.
that's no, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. I love that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And that's like a mix of like bigger contemporary artists, older, younger artists who are, but it's mainly people who are contemporary artists who pull my attention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. But I'm glad you mentioned Kara Walker because yeah, she is a
Kara
total.
Walker has some work up at 21C right now, by the way. Did you know
Oh,
that?
really? No.
Mhm.
Yeah, she's always
That's
fun.
a pretty strong exhibition that they have up right now.
Okay, I need to.
Clarence is in it.
Clarence, he's on
Yeah,
fire right now.
I know.
He is on fire. That's
They
awesome.
have some. They have in that exhibition. Titus Kafar is in there too. Yeah, there's like two or a couple pieces in there. Whew, his work, that work's amazing to see in person. He's also
I need to get over there. I don't know about you. I have still, it has been hard for me to get out of, and I know the pandemic continues, but like getting out and seeing shows, like you're mentioning 21C, like we have so many
yeah.
awesome venues around, and I've still struggled with that. Have you found yourself
Oh,
engaged
I struggle with
in
it.
person, or are you? Because I'm mostly engaging digitally still, which
Yeah.
it's satisfying. I've embraced it, but at the
Right.
same time, I'm like, ooh, I need to get back in the practice of like
Mm-hmm.
being in the
Going.
space with the work.
Right. I think my generation's super digital. So we're like, digital is like our jam. But when we do force ourselves to go out, it's always nice. But also, I think because I was in school during the pandemic and I didn't grow up super um, in the art world. Like my mom wasn't like really, like she wasn't super, my family wasn't into art really. I don't have a lot of experience really going to museums and galleries until I graduated and I was like, oh, I have to go to this opening and I have to go do these things. Um, so I don't have a lot of experience doing it, but it's fun when I go.
It is fun. Hey, would you? I used to do a little field trip series with Artspace
Oh,
artists.
really?
Yeah.
I'd go.
Right. All right. That makes
Yeah.
me start thinking because yeah, I because it can
I
be really hard.
I feel like I view art like I think there's like how certain artists view art, you know, like when they're like standing at a piece for 10 minutes and they're like, this piece is amazing. And they're thinking all these things. But then there's like that saying that like a regular person who's not super in the art world is gonna look at a painting for like 5 seconds maybe and then move on. I fall into that category.
I
Yeah.
I tend to too. I actually tend to move through galleries quickly, but then I'll pieces stop me in my tracks. Like there's no
Yeah.
doubt, which is like the
Right.
best. When
Uh-huh.
you're moving and you're just like, whoa.
Hmm.
So
I think I took my family. We went to New York. I had a show there, and so then we visited MoMA for the first time ever, and I was like with my family, who's not super into art, but like they appreciate it for what it is, and like we got through that museum in like an hour. We were like zooming. This is like, oh my gosh, my family's like, oh the water lilies. Who is this? Monet, cool, walks past. They're like, this is huge. Bye. Sees a freaking Starry Night by Van Gogh. They look at it, walk away. I'm like,
wow.
we went through like they're like, oh yeah, that's that painting that like is on everything. I'm like, that's Van Gogh.
That's amazing. I love that. So how the heck did you end up an artist?
Oh my gosh. Well, I was super kind of I was like into it. Like I was definitely not a sports person. So I was in like theater growing up and I always like really liked my art classes, but then I went to high school and became a cheerleader, so then it was kind of like art's lame. Super yeah, weird. And then I moved here and I didn't want to be a cheerleader and then I was like bored and I needed something to do. And so I joined art club because this girl in class was like, art clubs today. And I was like, sure, guess I'll go. And then that's how that started.
That's amazing. And I'm so
Mhm.
glad, even though it's maybe not the thing they're into, that your family has supported that. Because,
Yeah, they're supportive now. Or they're like, why can't you be a doctor, like a lawyer, like IT? Why don't you do something like that? Like they were like, here's the top 10 paying jobs and degrees. Like you should pick one of those. And I was like, no, I'm gonna paint. And I like wasn't good then. So I'm sure they were like, all right.
well, you've got that determination. That's what I've always said. Like, I did not become a visual artist because I just did not have the drive to do it. I've always enjoyed making. I enjoyed thinking
Yeah.
about it. I enjoy the materials.
Yeah.
But that there's that thing. You've got that thing, and that's
Well,
awesome.
my stepdad's Jamaican, and my mom, it was like a single mom who like built her company from the ground up. Same with my stepdad, and so I think in my head that made me be like, well, whatever I do, I'm gonna work towards it. They also both have degrees, but they are not doing what they got their degrees for. I think that in their head, they were just kind of like, if she gets this degree in art, she doesn't necessarily have to do art for the rest of her life. I think that was actually, they told me that. Like, that was their mindset. Like, they were like, well, she can go to school for art as long as she's getting a degree, but like, because my mom was the first person in her family to go to college. So in her head, it was just like, you're going to college. And so I didn't have to do it, but my stepdad was like, you better prove me wrong, girl. And I was like, okay. So I will forever be trying to prove him wrong.
Well, you are certainly on the path, and I've, like I said at the start of this, like it's been so exciting to watch you grow
Thank
as a
you.
person, and especially as an artist, because you really
Oh,
have. And
thanks so much.
yeah, I can't wait to see what's next for you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Should be fun.
It will be very fun. Oh, and I should say that Aliyah, you are with us at Artspace through the end of this calendar year. So,
Yes, I am.
it's already gone too fast.
I know, super
What,
quick.
6 months, and
Mhm.
we've got six more. So, for those of you listening, please take advantage of the fact that she is with us.
Come see me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. This has been really fun.